I think we should get going. Yeah?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to the March SLCN meeting. It's a great day because it's the first day of March Madness. I'm with the Sugar House Community Council, obviously, and then Jasmine's going to talk a little bit about the survey, and then we're going to talk to the Salt Lake City legislative team and kind of get an update, or I guess go ahead, Jasmine.
Yeah, just a quick reminder, Salt Lake City's mayor's office sent out the survey for community councils. Tomorrow is the last day to complete it, and it can be completed by anybody on your board. So this is really a great opportunity to put your concerns, your needs. We're just trying to get a temperature check and see like what everybody's feelings, thoughts, what the true needs are, so that we can continue to address them and move forward. So please fill it out. I'll share the link again in the chat for you all, but tomorrow's the last day. So thanks, everyone.
Michelle, are you ready? She unmute.
Then I was on mute. Yes, she said 1 second. I saw her cursor.
Yeah, sorry. My apologies. Too many windows open, unfortunately, and I could not find the right one. How are you guys?
Pretty good.
Oh,
well. Weather's great.
Great. It's good to see a lot of you that I am familiar with. Thanks for having me today. My name is Michelle Hoon, and I am with the Salt Lake City Legislative Affairs team. I'm the Deputy Director for Legislative Affairs. And Jasmine reached out quite a while ago and asked if our team would provide an update for you guys on basically what happened during the legislative session. Being a couple of weeks out now from the end of the session, you guys have probably seen a good amount of coverage on Salt Lake City and what happened and what didn't in the session. And so I'm happy to go through as much as you guys want to. I have probably about like a 15 or so minute presentation that I'll go through. We also have a session synopsis that I'm gonna try to put in the chat for you, but I've had a hard time putting things in chat. So if that doesn't work out, Jasmine, maybe I'll send it to you and you could distribute it. But that is a good sort of overview of everything that happened during the session. I'll share my screen too, so you guys can see that. I've requested to share. You can grant that. Okay. Okay, do you guys see the session synopsis up there?
Yep, we can see it.
Perfect. Okay, so this is something that we do every year at the end of the legislative session. And it is a good opportunity for you to just have an overview of everything that we have been tracking, all of the different stats and things that can be helpful for you to know. Let me pull up my list here. Okay. So, by a recap for you all, there were more bills that were introduced during this legislative session than have ever been introduced before. It was a record break of 1,016. I am unfortunately not sure how much higher that is than previous years, but that is more bills that have been introduced than ever before. And that's a pretty consistent trend that we've seen over the last several years. That part has never really gone down. The interesting part this year is that they did pass fewer bills than they have passed in previous years. So they passed, I want to say it's 540 bills total. which is about, I want to say maybe like 30 or 40 shy of what they had passed the year before. So they were busy. Legislators were definitely busy. Salt Lake City tracked 351 bills this session, and if you include the substitutes to those bills, it was actually about 700. So what our team does is we go through every single bill that the legislature puts out, and we analyze it for impact to Salt Lake City. Does it impact our departments? Would it impact any special projects or things that we're undertaking in the city? And then we put those through via a tracker that we use. We put those through to our departments, and our departments provide our team with feedback on how that bill would impact them. And then we use that to determine what we need to do as the city representatives up on the Hill to try and figure out how to make those things better, or if we're in support of the bill, how to get it passed. There were 53 high priority bills for Salt Lake City this session. So that means bills that our team actively worked to either try to amend or to get passed. If you include substitutes, it's actually quite a bit higher. I think it was somewhere around 126 pieces of legislation, so bills and subs, that we actively worked on this past session. There were also 70 bills that were a medium priority. And what that means is we still work to amend or support those, but we usually do it by coordinating with community partners. So we'll work with the Wasatch Front Regional Council or the Utah League of Cities and Towns. Equality Utah was another one that we worked with quite a bit this year. And those are some fantastic partners. And we got to see, I think, some really good progress and some bills that did not go forward as a result of those really good partnerships. Some bills, and I will get to the specifics on a couple of bills that you guys are probably pretty interested in, but some bills that require months and months of negotiation to get them to a place that serves our residents really well. SB 242 is one of those. That's the big road bill that was this year, and I will talk in depth about that one when I get into a couple of very specific bills. But we, all in all, generally felt like this year was really productive. It was probably the most productive session that we have had with the state legislature in several years. And that's really thanks to all of the very good work that has been done by our elected officials in trying to create relationships with leadership on the Hill and with the individual legislators. That is work that has to be done in the interim. It can't really be done during the legislative session because the legislative session is a little too nuts. But our elected officials have done a really fantastic job of doing outreach and really trying to build relationships with legislators so that our elected officials can advocate properly on the Hill for the needs of our constituency. So there's a couple of key themes that I'll go over with you guys. The things that we saw that really were sort of like the key things that legislators focused on this year were tax reform. There was a ton of tax reform bills that came out. Not a lot of them passed. I'll go over the ones that did, but there were definitely some wild ideas around tax reform that were contemplated during the legislative session that did not go forward, and then there are some bills that did go forward. But all in all, the bills that did pass, we felt pretty supportive of. Those bills were mostly focused on transparency and trying to get people involved in the process earlier when there's going to be a tax increase. There was also a lot of focus on economic development, so a lot of bills that came through that would affect our community reinvestment agency and the other levers that we use to try to create housing and create jobs in the city. Transportation was also a big one that has been pretty standard for the last couple of years. Public safety and homelessness also a big focus this year. Energy has been a big focus for several years, and that is no different this year. That definitely was a big deal. Water and immigration also were big focuses for the legislature. I am going to scroll down here so you guys can see a couple of different things. Kind of speaking to that point, some of the things, some interesting things I think to note. The police department always has the most bills that get assigned to them, but this year was pretty wild. There was 329 bills for the police department to review. One thing I will say is that a lot of those bills are worked out in the interim. So those are like criminal code changes, or they're things that may not like actively like affect the administration of the police department, but they're like criminal code things. That being said, those are things the police department needs to know about, so it's important that we stay on top of those things. There were 176 bills that actively affected department operations, so that's like how you administer the police department. And of those 176, 18 of those were high priority bills that we worked with them to either try to get passed or to get amended. Our community and neighborhoods department had the next highest. They had about 240 bills. And they had 31 of those that were high priority bills. So those are going to be more of those like economic development bills that I was talking about. This year, very different than in years past. What we've been able to do is come up with a list of past bills and a list of failed bills, which you will see here. It's a very interesting thing to know. You can take a look at that, but I will walk you through a couple of our high priority bills that didn't pass. So in the realm of tax reforms, like I said, there were several bills that came out that would have had a pretty profound impact on our city's general fund. We mostly partnered with the Utah League of Cities and Towns. We also worked with the Taxpayers Association and a couple of other community partners to ensure that our city budget was pretty preserved, to make sure that we could just maintain our critical municipal services. One bill that did pass that I think is good for you guys to know about is HB 236. That's Truth in Taxation Amendments, and that is by Representative Karen Peterson. What this bill does is it adds additional transparency to the truth in taxation process. So as engaged members of our community, you guys are probably fairly familiar with the truth in taxation process. There have been, I think, probably some fairly legitimate concerns that came from our legislators regarding the truth in taxation process and how truth in taxation hearings are held after the budget, after the budget deliberations are happening. So what this bill does is it kind of pushes that process forward a little bit. We will need to provide notice to the community in the event that we are contemplating a property tax increase. That will have to be published on the city's website. I believe it's 7 days before the first hearing on the budget. So that's new. That's a new thing. And what that's really geared at is trying to get people aware of and involved in the process, which we have undergone for like every year and will continue to undergo, which is a very public and open process if we are, as we're deliberating our budget. But in the event that we are faced with trying to enact a property tax increase, we will have this new requirement to post on our website. I believe it's 7 days beforehand. So that is a new thing, and it is really focused on transparency and trying to get people involved in the process. So we were actually supportive of this bill going forward. There were a lot of ideas, as I mentioned, that did not make it through. So there were some ideas around budget caps, so capping municipal budgets. There were some fund balance requirement ideas that did not go through. There were some taxes on new growth that didn't go through. And then there was a proposal for a property tax increase only being approved by voters. I think that's called a Taxpayer Bill of Rights, TABOR. That did not pass either. There were, as I mentioned, also a lot of bills around economic development. There were at first quite a few bills around economic development, and then they kind of all came together in one very big bill. That's HB 507. And that bill did a lot of things. One of the things that it did that we're really grateful for is allocated $100 million to regionally significant infrastructure. And the hope with that is that this state infrastructure bank will be a place that cities can go to ask for money to create infrastructure that will then unlock opportunities for affordable owner-occupied housing throughout the state. So this is actually really going to, I think, more impact those greenfield development cities, not necessarily a city like Salt Lake City, although we do have some infrastructure needs that we probably will want to see some help from this state infrastructure bank on. Funding parameters around that 100 million are yet to be determined. There is a board that was created by this legislation, and they, I believe, will come up with the parameters around that funding. And then there was also an allocation of money to the Salt Palace redevelopment. So that is helpful there. Transportation. I think the thing that probably everybody knows about and wants to talk about is SB 242. That's transportation amendments by Senator Harper. This is a big omnibus bill that he runs, that Senator Harper runs every year. It has a lot of stuff in it. I want to say I don't even know how many pages it is. It's a novel. So if you want to find something to read before you go to sleep, it's a good opportunity there. There are a couple of things that I think are helpful to know about SB 242. First of all, it does not require us to pull out any bike infrastructure. This was something that we were concerned about at the beginning of the legislative session. We were very nervous that there would be some legislation on the heels of SB 195, which was run last year, that would require us to pull out bike infrastructure. This does not do that. It does not also impact our federal funding. It doesn't take control of our streets, and it doesn't stall out our transportation projects. It also doesn't just focus on cars, which is good to know. A couple of things that it does do, it strikes the provisions in SB 195 around submission of a mobility plan for any project in the study area that was outlined in SB 195, which was 600 north to 2100 south and Foothill to I-15. That was the study area that UDOT needed to do that study on this past year, which they did. And they identified a couple of key areas in which we could improve. It also, what SB 242 does is it codifies the development of an agreement between the city and UDOT. And then it establishes some parameters for that. So essentially what is happening now is instead of having to submit a mobility plan every time we want to do a project, what it does is it codifies a tiered road system, which I'll go over a little bit in a minute, but there's 4 tiers to roads. There's regionally significant thoroughfares, there are important corridors, and then there are low volume and residential streets, and there are some rules around what we can and cannot do on each of those streets. So this is all going into a agreement that we need to enter into with UDOT. It does expand the study area from from SB 195. It now goes from 600 North, it goes from Redwood Road to the city's southern boundary, which that kind of jogs a bit, but is basically I-80, and then 600 North to Foothill. So that's new, kind of expanded that study area into the west side of the city. So the critical capacity routes map, that's the tiered map system. Tier 1 roads are regionally significant roads, so state roads. We cannot do what's called highway reduction strategies on those roads, so we can't remove lanes from those roads. We can do safety improvements, however, on those roads. So you can do traffic calming, but you can't reduce lanes on those roads. Tier 2 roads are corridors important to the transportation network. So those are major arterials like Main Street. Highway reduction strategies are allowed with UDOT review on those roads. So they want to make sure that people can still travel through the city without too much delay. If we were to reduce lanes or take on other projects on a tier 2 corridor. Tier 3 is low volume streets. We can do a highway reduction strategy on that. So we can reduce the lane, we can reduce the lane width, we can do any sort of traffic calming that we want to do on tier 3, and then tier 4 roads are residential roads. There will be a map that gets released that outlines what streets are what. That's part of this UDOT agreement that we are working on currently. And as I mentioned, those the road tiers have yet to be determined. That's really UDOT. UDOT is going through and analyzing all of those roads and determining which roads are going to be put into what categories. SB 242 also requires an analysis of and potential mitigation, is what it says, of highway reduction strategies on a couple of different roads that have seen lane reductions. That is 300 west from 400 south to 900 south, 200 south from 300 west to 300 east, and 400 south from West Temple to I-15. This does not mean that we have to pull out infrastructure, but it does mean that we need to do an analysis to make sure that the goals of those highway reduction strategies are actually being met. So are people safer as a result of those highway reduction strategies? And then if we also need to come up with mitigation plans. So if there's lost parking, we need to work with those businesses in those areas to try to come up with a solution to help them. And then we also need to potentially undergo some public education campaigns. We need to increase signage, things like that. Sorry, my cat is excited. Mm-hmm. That I am presenting to you guys today. We also need to continually evaluate all roads for safety and efficiency for all modes of transportation, whether that is cars or bikes or pedestrians. As part of the agreement with UDOT, we will need to adopt and codify that tiered road map into the city's transportation plans and ordinances. And then it also outlines a couple of different rules for road widths. So tier 1 and tier 2 roads must be at least 11 feet. And then tier 3 and below can be 10 feet or more. Parking reduction engagement is another thing that I mentioned. So we have a stakeholder group that was put together as a result of SB 195 that is different residents and business owners and community stakeholders, and we will be working with them to try to figure out how to mitigate lost parking if there are more than 3 spaces more than 3 parking spaces that are lost as the result of a highway reduction strategy. This is all very complex, but it is, and it's big legislation, and we are working with our community and neighborhoods team to figure out how to implement this one. So be on the lookout for that agreement with UDOT to come out and for potential options for public engagement around that agreement. Public safety and homelessness, always a big topic of conversation. As you probably know, before the session started, there was a lot of talk of a large-scale homeless campus that could be coming to the west side of Salt Lake City. That did not get funded this year. There was a big funding ask for that one. That funding did not go forward. We do not know what the future of that campus is. I don't think it's a good idea to say that it will go forward or that it won't. But what we do know is that it's not going forward this year. So if you do have questions about the future of that plan, I would definitely reach out to the Office of Homeless Services. Tyler Clancy has now moved from his former role as a state legislator into his new role as the coordinator of the Office of Homeless Services, and he took over for Wayne Niederhauser when Wayne retired late last year. Existing state funding that was available for homelessness, there was some talk about whether or not that would be used for the campus. That is not being used for the campus this year. What it is going to do is it is reappropriated for crisis shelter and housing with a local match. Justice involved high utilizers, and then support for mental health and behavioral health systems with matching dollars required from local governments. So that's city and county. There were also a couple of specific appropriations. There was $1 million that was appropriated to the Other Side Village. That's on the west side of Salt Lake City. And then Switchpoint in St. George also got $600,000. And then there was money appropriated for what's called phase 2 investments, which really just means the potential to expand future programs if they're showing promising outcomes. And I think that was about $15 million. There were a couple of specific bills in the homelessness and public safety realm that I think are good for you guys to know about. HB 572, that's behavioral health, mental health, and social services amendments. That's by Rep. Elison. What that does is it makes changes to the mental and behavioral health services system, including jail diversion programs, peer support programs, and civil commitment. The county is our local mental health authority, so this really impacts the county. And if you guys have specific questions, I can point you to folks on the county level that would be good to ask about specific questions. However, we do think that this will be a net positive for the city's public safety plan and implementation of the city's public safety plan, particularly around those jail diversion and civil commitment changes. And then HB 308, Homeless Services Amendments. This is by Representative Okerlund. What this one does is it makes some changes to the Office of Homeless Services and the duties of the state coordinator. It also creates a one-time increase in the amount of money that non-shelter cities pay into the Homeless Shelter Cities Mitigation Fund. So as a city that hosts homeless shelters, we do not pay into this fund. It's cities that don't have shelters that do pay into the fund, and then the fund pays out cities that do have shelters. So we're a recipient of mitigation funding, and we in Salt Lake City use that money for the homeless resource center squads through the police department. So what this does is it increases the amount of money that those non-shelter cities pay into that pot. And then we will get to see an increase in funding coming to us as a result of that. It's not a ton of money, but it definitely is super helpful for us because those programs have actually been underfunded for quite some time. There is also, I think, a pretty well-recognized need that we need to have kind of a more holistic strategy for how the homeless shelter cities mitigation fund actually works. So the Utah League of Cities and Towns is going to get together with shelter cities and non-shelter cities and work on some legislation to update for next year. And what that will do, hopefully, is it will kind of level out that fund and get that fund to a place where cities who host homeless shelters are legitimately held harmless, as opposed to having to take on more and more and more burden with their public safety resources. Energy, as far as energy is concerned, HB 238. This is Utah Energy Generation and Transmission Planning. That's by Representative Albrecht. What this one does is it was kind of a last minute concern for us and the Community Renewable Program, which, if you have not heard of the Community Renewable Program, what this is it's a collective of 19 cities that have gotten together and said that we would like to opt into a program with Rocky Mountain Power that provides primarily renewable energy to the city for a small fee that is tacked on to your power bill. And what this does is it just creates an opt-out option for, well, there was always an opt-out option, but what this does is what HB 238 does is it puts parameters around how Rocky Mountain Power will communicate with its customers on how to opt out of that program. So you're automatically, I think, put into that program, but if you want to opt out, it creates a really easy pathway for you to opt out as a ratepayer. So that passed, and we were supportive of that. Water is always a big deal, especially this year. This year is no different. In fact, probably, I think it was maybe even more of a concern this year than it has been in years past. One interesting, last minute bill that came forward was HJR 30. This is House Joint Resolution to approve the transfer of land. This is by Representative Snyder. This was I think this was 10 o'clock on the last day. So it was a surprise resolution that came out. It's the result of a long-standing legal dispute between the state and the federal government. And essentially what it does is it transfers about 22,000 acres of land below the Great Salt Lake to the federal government, and the federal government will pay us about $60 million for that. And then that $60 million is to be used to benefit the lake solely. So that is great. We are definitely really happy to see an extra amount of money go to the lake and to benefit the lake. So that's great. HB 296 water commitment amendments was run by Rep. Wynn. And what that does is it allows for water that is conserved for the Great Salt Lake to be accounted for in a water conservation plan. So if your city is coming up with a water conservation plan, sending water to the lake can count towards conservation, which is a change from previous years. And then last but not least, we'll talk about immigration. There were two bills that we were watching very closely related to immigration. And there was a lot that happened with this one. So first, and I will say these two bills didn't pass, and we were grateful that they did not pass. But first was HB 88, which is Public Assistance Amendments by Representative Lee. What that bill would have done that was really concerning, there were a lot of things. I think this bill was subbed 7 or 8 times. There were a lot of things that were contemplated in this bill that would have been pretty tough. But one of the things I think that was super concerning for us was that individuals it started out by saying that all services to individuals without documentation would be prohibited, and that public employees, so people like police officers, would be held criminally liable if they did offer services to people who were undocumented. So if you think, if you have somebody who has a medical emergency on the street, our fire folks would not be able to help them unless they were documented. They would be held criminally liable. So that got walked back quite a bit. It ended up getting it ended up getting circled on the House floor and was never heard in the Senate. So that one did not go forward. There were parts of it, though, that were subbed into Representative Shepherd's HB 386 immigration amendments. This one also had a pretty feisty floor debate when some aspects of HB 88 were added to HB 368. Those were primarily around in-state tuition and then access to certain food, shelter, and senior services. That bill also did not pass. It did pass the House, I believe, but it never got heard in the Senate, so that did not go forward. As mentioned, you guys can see here, there were a lot of bills that didn't go, there were a lot of other bills that didn't go forward. HB 196, Highway Designation Amendments, that was the bill that was being run to rename Harvey Milk Boulevard to Charlie Kirk Boulevard. That did not go forward. There was also an impact fee bill that we were very concerned about that would have restricted the city's use of impact fees to designated areas in the city. That can be challenging for lots of reasons, not the least of which is our water system and the fact that our water system uses impact fees and has to serve the entire city and sometimes regionally. There were a couple of other bills that I think are interesting to know about. HB 302 was government speech neutrality. This was the sort of the answer to the flag bill from last year. What this would have done is it would have limited the city to only adopting one official flag, but we could have adopted multiple ceremonial flags. This one did pass the House. It did not get heard, I think, in the Senate, or it didn't pass the Senate. So that one did not go forward. So we are still under the same rules regarding flags that we have been under. So we still have all of our same official flags. I think that's good for now. Do you guys have any questions for me?
Michelle, are you okay to go until 10?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, guys, we have about 20 minutes for anybody who has any questions. Go ahead, Amy.
Hello. I'm curious about Steve Ellison's homelessness bill, and I looked at it, but I don't know how many substitutions or revisions it went through. Could you talk about its impact on our current conditional use permits with the homeless resource centers and how that's impacting the maximum capacity that they have during the normal times of year and also during times of year that are considered emergency shelter periods for either winter or summer?
Yeah. Thanks for that question.
Weeds, but it impacts our neighborhood a lot, so we think about it.
Yeah, it definitely does, for sure. So there was a lot of drama, I will say, at the end of the session around homelessness bills. Steve Ellison's, I believe it was HB 596, was dropped pretty late. And what that one did was it had the mitigation provisions that I mentioned earlier. It also had some provisions in it related to flexing shelters, so flexing your emergency shelter if you need to. And then it also had provisions related to Code Blue and Code Red in that bill. That bill did not pass. So that bill died. It did not. Yeah, it did not pass. However, that being said, some of the aspects of that bill were subbed into, it was HB 5. Which one? I am so sorry, you guys. I feel like I should know all of the numbers of these bills, but after a while, it gets hard.
Michelle, it's HB 308. It's Okerlund's bill.
Okay, thank you. Yes, HB 308. So this actually, there are a couple of things that ended up in both 572 and HB 308, but thank you, Janet. That is definitely very helpful. So HB 308, what this one does is it essentially says that a shelter can flex above its current capacity as set by a conditional use permit. So our conditional use permits do cap our current homeless shelters. I'm not going to go over the numbers right now because I don't remember them off the top of my head and I don't want to say something wrong, but what it does is it
use permits cap at 200. That's how it was written originally, but the state has overridden that several times.
Yes, yeah. Cap that at 200. What this bill does is it allows for shelters to operate at 135% of their capacity if the city if they do so in coordination with the city. So we have been flexed in our homeless shelters for several years at this point. And what this does is it essentially says, if the city and the shelter get together and they agree to flex capacity, it doesn't say that you have to flex up to 135, but it allows you to flex up to 135% if that makes sense for the city to do. So I am not sure what that is going to look like exactly for the ballpark neighborhood and for the Central City neighborhood. I believe that 135 is probably pretty close to what has been kind of standard to where they've been at standard for the last couple of years. The other thing that it does is it also allows for the shelter that has been open in West Valley for several years to operate as what's called a Tier 1 shelter. So it keeps that facility open and it allows that facility to take mitigation funding at the year-round level as opposed to the seasonal level. Does that answer your question?
A little bit. I know 270 people is actually a little higher than it has been most of the time, and that's 135% of the 200 people.
Good to know.
One of these bills had a time limit on the flexing, I guess to encourage folks to develop more shelter options instead of fewer. Is that time limit still in there in terms of like, in 2027, this has to move to a different mechanism? That may have been an earlier version of the Eelison bill instead of what got put into the Okerlund bill. Do you know that?
That is a good question. I don't believe so. I don't believe that there's a time limit on it. What I do believe is that there is a time limit on the increase to mitigation funding. I do know that. So mitigation funding, as I mentioned, that was a one-time increase, and that will revert back to pending if there's other legislation that kind of codifies this a little bit more, that will change. But as of now, non-shelter cities are assessed at a higher level just until 2027. So it's just for this next year.
All right, guys, we have 3 hands. We have 15 minutes. Go ahead, Jen.
Thank you. I don't mean to shoot the messenger, Michelle, but
Go for it.
I have big questions about transportation.
Sure, yeah.
And a little emotionally charged. So for context, last week we had a 6-year-old boy trying to cross at Glendale Regional Park. It was a multiple threat accident. So one car stopped and in the lane over, the other truck didn't see the child or the children. There were multiple children. He's got a leg fracture and multiple fractures in his face. He's in a wheelchair. So our community in Glendale is very highly mobilized and ready to take action. But we're really concerned about SB 242.
Yeah.
Do you know when the map and all of those regulations are going to be codified? Do they have a deadline?
I am not 100% sure. I believe it's in the next year that needs to be codified, and I do believe that there is going to be options for public engagement. What I would suggest is maybe if you guys wanted to do a deeper dive on SB 242, you potentially could have somebody from our transportation team come and talk to you about the implementation plan associated with that. And I'm very sorry to hear about that situation.
Yeah. So a little bit of follow up. Our community is meeting on the 28th, Saturday. And so we are going to be taking those ideas to the city. So we won't have time for another meeting before that. So I'm taking the lead, supporting the people in my community. I'm going to be reaching out to as many officials as I can. They're invited. But I just can't wait, another month. And then with all of the, codifications that are taking place, we can't wait a year just to wait another couple of years, just to wait another couple of years.
Yeah.
So, and I'm really concerned about this street being labeled tier 2 instead of tier 3, when we would love for it to be, one way instead of 2-way. That's really going to throw a wrench into things. And I guess you might not know about this, but just wondering what is going on with all the other projects that are already in the works. Are those allowed to continue? Or are we allowed to?
Yes, those are allowed to continue. As far as I understand it, everything that is currently in the works. So with SB 195, anything that had been advertised was allowed to go forward. So it was specific to future projects. And I believe that is still the same. So if there is something that has already been advertised in the city, so like 600 North, for example, I am in Fair Park. 600 North is very close to my house, so I pay very close attention to everything that's happening over there. That is allowed to go forward. That had been advertised. That was allowed to go forward. And that is still the case as far as I understand it. So anything that is currently underway is allowed to continue to go forward.
Okay. Does that also mean then that for the next year, we're going to be in limbo and not able to approve projects until we have our final plan in place?
I'm not 100% sure. And that this is, it's pretty complex as far as like where things are at, where projects are at in certain stages. So if there are projects, and you're going to have to forgive me, I'm not part of the transportation division, so I couldn't tell you exactly like how these things go, but I know that there are sort of certain benchmarks that are to be met, and at a certain point, if a project has hit a certain benchmark, it can go forward. If a project has not hit a certain benchmark, that's probably going to have to wait for a minute while we update our ordinances, while we get under this contract or under this agreement with UDOT, and then update all of our ordinances and our plans. But there was a level at which projects were eligible to continue to go forward. And I'm sorry, I just don't know what those are, but the transportation team would probably know more specifics there.
Okay, thanks.
We'll see if we can get them in April or May to our meeting.
Yeah.
Kenny, okay if we go to Jim Jenkins?
Hey, Landon?
Yeah.
Just real quick on that. I do agree
Sure.
get the application in front of you. But Jennifer, the mayor's office is pursuing with transportation about how to deal with that situation at 17th South more immediately, separate than the legislation. So Jill Love is following up, and we'll keep you updated on it.
Okay, that's awesome. Who was following up?
Jill Remington Love, who's Chief Administrative Officer for the city.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew. Go ahead, Jim.
I had a transportation question, but after that, I'll cede my time.
Come
All right,
on.
Yeah. We'll get Lynn Jacobs in the hot seat next.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jason.
Gotcha. Seating time. That sounded like it was a legislative hearing there, right?
Hi, Jason.
Michelle, hi. I just had a quick question. Oftentimes, we'll see bills that come up as trial balloons that don't actually pass, but
Yep.
they'll come back in future years. What are
Yep.
the bills that the city's looking at to prepare for 2027, and then specifically ones that community councils or people on this call can work on?
That is a really good question, Jason. Thanks. I'm going to look at what the list of bills that didn't pass. I'm going to pull that back up here really quick for you. We do expect a lot more action, I will say, around. I don't think that the tax fights are done. I think that there will be more interest and action around taxes. Taxes were like surprisingly one of the most charged negotiations this year, and one of the most difficult things that we negotiated around this year. Just because I think that there's a lot of misconceptions at the state level about how cities and counties use their tax money. So they did not do quite the damage that we expected them to do this season, and we're definitely very grateful for that. But I do think that probably will continue. There will probably be future fights on that. And then there probably will be future fights around water. We don't know what that is going to look like. We do have an excellent advocate in our corner in Laura Briefer. She does a fantastic job of advocating for on the city's behalf and making sure that we can continue to protect our watersheds and can continue to protect our water rights as we need to. And then the other thing that I think I would say to look out for is those like economic development focused bills. There were, as I mentioned, there were several different like ideas around economic development, particularly as it relates to the Community Reinvestment Agency and the work that they do. So it's kind of fascinating to see this, but there's a growing anti-developer sentiment up on the Hill, which is pretty fascinating to see because there are a lot of developers also on the Hill. So that's new, but there's kind of, I think, just a growing kind of either misunderstanding or mistrust of how things like tax credits are used to develop affordable housing and things like that. So I think that is going to continue. I think that there's going to be more sort of momentum in that area. One thing that I did not touch on that is kind of wonky, but you guys, I'm sure would be interested in this kind of thing, is that there are a lot of different economic development tools that we currently have in our arsenal to be able to use. So housing and transit reinvestment zones, there's a few, we call them the things that you get at swag bills, but they're HOPS, FIZ, that's first time. HOPS is a housing opportunity zones. FIZ is first home investment zones. HTRZs is housing and transit reinvestment zones. There's a lot of momentum around pulling those all into one tool. That is a city-initiated tool that we can use that is regionally significant. Regional significance is also a thing that I heard a lot this year that I have not heard in the past, but regionally significant development tools. So there's a lot of momentum, I will say, around trying to kind of rein in the opportunities that we have both as cities and counties and as the state to work with tax increment financing and be able to enact those development tools that we currently have available to us. So there were not a ton of changes that were made to that this year, but I do think that will probably continue to be scrutinized on the state level.
Anybody have any other questions? Well, thanks for always coming, Michelle.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. You guys
Do you
are
mind sharing that
fantastic.
slide? Judy Shorts asked, she can't read it very well. Can you mind sending that slide to everybody?
Let me see if I can upload it.
Or you can send it to Jasmine and we can send it out to the crew.
Yes, if you can't upload it, and I know, Judy, I got your email about the chat, so don't worry, we'll still send it out, even if it gets uploaded.
Oh, did I do it?
Yes, yep,
Ah,
it's in there.
yes.
So we'll give
Sweet.
everybody
Well
a couple
done.
minutes to hit the download button on that before we end the meeting.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, absolutely.
right, and
So fantastic. Thank you. for
Yeah,
having
well, thank you so much. Thank you for what you do for the city. And we'll try to get Lynn Jacobson, maybe a representative from UDOT here in April.
Sounds great.
Okay.